Hi, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage. This is a video series, a podcast, a series of conversations between myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, and this splendid man, Mike Hutchinson, also a games designer and developer, about designing better miniatures games. Now, there is a game design principle. I think sort of came across from video games, but it's true for everybody. Is that your game is about what your players spend most of their time doing.
Mm.
You might think your game is about one or another thing, but if your players spend 50% of their time doing one thing and one thing only, and the rest of the time spread amongst a bunch of other things, then your game is about that one thing in actuality. Now, in relation to two or more player tabletop games, and particularly tabletop miniatures games, your players are going to spend 50% or more of their time in downtime by definition.
Yeah.
By literal, the nature of the thing. Half of their time, if it's a two-player game, is going to be downtime, and if there are more than two players, more than half of their time is going to be downtime. But even if you get it down to like 40% of the time by having like a level of interaction, it's still going to be the thing they spend more single time doing than any other thing they do in the game. So this is my like big idea here, is that your game is about its downtime. That is the main defining feature of your game. And the thing is, we're all terrified of downtime. All
Mm.
deck designers are absolutely terrified of it. It's this absolute boogeyman that keeps us up at night. Whether there's too much downtime, whether downtime is too downy, whether there's too little sort of going on interaction, or best put some extra save rolls in there so that people feel like they're involved with the game during their downtime. And I want to engage with the idea of being less afraid of it, of accepting that if it is what your game is going to be about, you've got to consider making it interesting and useful and worthwhile and active and something other than, there are games that people have said you could play with chess clock and bang the chess clock and walk away from the table
Mm.
until like it's your turn and then come back and play your turn.
And that's often not true because like you're trying to analyze the game state and think about your moves. But in miniatures games, which can be very dynamic,
Mm,
like it's quite possible that there's such a change in game state that it is really difficult to make any kind of sensible strategic determinations early on in the downtime.
yeah, and I think one of the things about Downtime, and one of the ways I think that you can see how defining they are of these sorts of games is like in other games, like video games and often sports games, people talk about things like flow state and things where it's like what defines a lot of those games is the rhythm you get into as you're flowing through the game and you're running along and everything's happening, and then the
Mm.
designer like drops bricks in to break your flow state and make you sort of sit back, and that's how they create a rhythm and a fashion of the game. And the really good players of those games are really good at getting into the flow state for that particular game. The speed runners, the high end, players of fighting games are just like constantly in that flow state that most players only ever enter into a few short times. Now,
Mm.
our sorts of games definitely aren't about that, and the top players of those games aren't about that. Our games are about the ability to like the top players of tabletop miniatures games are able to switch focus on and off like at will, that they can switch away from the game at certain points, and they can switch the focus on absolutely. And if you have the ability to focus at the right times at the right points, um you have a huge advantage over somebody who has to pay attention to everything. Like great chess players are great because they know to not pay attention to 99% of what is available on any given chessboard. It's why designing, chess playing computers was such a challenge, because computers had to check every single option. They couldn't focus in the way that human brains can. And figuring out how the downtime of your game and where it lands and where it happens for different players shifts or requires them to turn their focus on or turn their focus off in order to avoid just being exhausted by the information that is irrelevant to their decision making process, I think is extremely definitional for these sorts of games, and I think is something that is worth, I don't know, maybe philosophically or whatever, considering, but in relation to how you design a game and how you build it and the rhythms and the beats. Because we talked before about like the rhythms of games, and I've had people sort of, well, what do you mean by that? How do you define the rhythm of play, the sequence of play, the story beats? How do you put story beats into a completely emergent and completely sort of unpredictable thing? And it's, for me, it's about how one of the big features is about how you place out your downtime moments, how you switch the game on and off for players, and who you switch it on and off for at various points. That's the thing that's been going.
That was a great pitch. I love it.
That's the thing that's been going through my mind, and I thought talking words about it on a video about designing games would be a thing.
So look, listen, there's a couple of things that I want to, if not challenge, I just want to kind of pick at and have a little look at, because I really like the general idea, and I want to understand it more. I think one thing, like one of the reasons that I like elegant resolution systems that are lightweight, and I like, as a general rule, alternating activations, is that what you get is a rhythm where I watch you changing the game state in a way that's very fast, and that hopefully I have some potential to influence over, or a decision to spend a resource to influence. And with that small increment of game state, play passes to me, I have an opportunity to increment the game state in a small way, in a way that doesn't interrupt with a chunky, like annoying, unwieldy mechanic. And that's how we get a rhythm. We get a blow, counter blow, counter blow. And every time you're in the middle of counter punching, I'm holding a couple of chips going, oh, is this the moment that I use my chip or not? And I'm calculating all the kind of possibilities of where pressure might be applied. And so for me, like, I definitely have experienced flow state regularly in games where both of those things are true. I think in games where there is a much more significant period of time where, like, you are moving your whole army, I'm chilling out and scratching my ass, like, you know, and then we swap over, like, that for me is a more sedate sort of exchange of like letters from one to the other. It's not a flow state in anything like the same way. And I agree that that's okay, and that's actually a fine way to play a game. And it's not that every game has to be a sort of rapid fire, you know, jousting match where we're completely in each other's faces and there's this flow state of exchange of game states that in these little tiny ways. And maybe that's partly it. It's like, another way of framing this is like, instead of your game being about downtime, your game is about exchanging game state, and like, how enjoyable is it to pass a puzzle over to the other player and say, well, during my turn, I'm going to pass this over to you. And therefore your downtime is about considering the game state that I could pass back to you, or how you are going to change the game state in the future. Like, if scenario planning, and basically saying, okay, well, if he does that, that gives me 3 decent options of those options. This one's going to create the most interesting options. And so, like, yeah. And then I guess, like, I really like the idea that your game is about the downtime, because of course we obsess about what it is that we're doing in the downtime. And I think that there are 2 obvious things that you can do in the downtime beyond relaxing. And one is enjoying the mayhem that's going on. And I think Gaslands at its best does a good job of using downtime in kind of a collaborative sort of chortling along with whatever nonsense is going on. And people who get knocked out don't have as much fun. Like, people who wipe out and can't play for a little while don't have as much fun, but they are still chortling along and pointing at the templates and enjoying people being set on fire. And I think that's one that I immediately jump to. And the other is, as I said, like considering how to spend my resources if I have an opportunity to spend them in your turn. And Infinity is a fantastic example of that. You know, Billion Suns has that with the command tokens. I think modern 40k, the 10th edition, has lost a little momentum on this. Like, only have one or two what are called command points. And so I've got a couple of decisions to make in your entire army's turn, and it would just be a lot nicer if there were more like 5 decisions rather than 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of optional reaction points are a more transgressive thing than we sometimes give them credit for. It's like, so in A Billion Suns, you've got these fungible resources that at various points the game like boxes out a little sequence and says, here's a point where you'll be allowed to spend a fungible resource, and you spend it or you don't.
Yeah, so this is like, you know, you're about to get shot, you can spend a resource to bump your saving throw up. And something that looked like a soft target is now not as soft.
Yeah, whereas there are games that say, when X happens, when someone passes in line of sight of your shooter, you have an option to spend a resource to interrupt and do something. And it's not a boxed out thing in the way that like A Billion Suns boxes it out into shooting phases, and they're generally, I'm shooting at you, you're probably going to have some sort of reaction ability. We accept that this in the interactive moment of the game.
Right, and 40k 10th edition does this when it says like when someone completes a move or a charge, there's like a brief player interrupt window where you can spend a command point to overwatch them.
Yeah, whereas the sorts of games who say anywhere along the passage of movement of a particular other miniature, you can stop them and go, right, this is when I'm spending my resource. That is an extremely transgressive thing for those games to do. If you think about the nature of games, the thing that one of the reasons we play games like, I know, Snakes and Ladders for small children is that teaching you to take your turn is a very important thing to teach small children. It's one of the reasons we play absolute baloney games with very small children, because it's a really important social construct, a thing to understand. Taking your turn, knowing that it's not your turn, are really, really important for like general social life. And then for a game to go, no, you don't. You don't need to take your turn. You can steal.
We can just talk over the top of each other.
Yeah, you can steal the turn from the other person when they don't want you to, when they're not expecting you to. You can just go, my turn now. That's an insane thing to try. If you think about it, you know, about what it means and how it works. There's a board game called Once Upon a Time, and it's a storytelling board game, and you literally tell a fairy tale story. And then if you say certain words other people got on their cards, they can steal the story from you. And that designer talked about how he designed that game because you're not allowed to interrupt other people when they're speaking. That's a fundamental sort of basic social construct. And he just wanted to make a game that got to say to you, you're allowed to interrupt now. You're allowed. It's part of the game. It's part of the play. And the fact that one of the main ways that breaks the idea of downtime is an act that is like social construct, normal behavior, absolutely anathema, stealing another person's turn from them. I just think that's incredibly fascinating. I think that's incredibly important and odd and special, and thinking about the way that the thing that breaks out from this sort of downtime idea is a thing that breaks out from like all social norms of the way you're allowed to act towards another human being, especially in the magic circle of a game where we know that turns are like super sacrosanct. I just think that that's a very magical, weird, powerful thing. And I think it's the sort of thing that, considering all of the things that go into games and the things they teach us and the ways they affect us, I think that's really interesting, and I think that I'm not sure I have anything super insightful to say.
No, I think that's good. I think just pointing at that one and going how strange. I haven't played a truly interruptive game for a while. It'd be interesting to go back and have a play of one with that kind of concept in mind. One thing I have been playing recently is so I was noodling around with This Is Not a Test, Jerry Maguire's post-apocalyptic game, and that has an activation mechanic that the net result of which is you don't know how long the downtime that you're currently having is going to last for. So you try and activate a model, and then at some point you fail, and then it's suddenly my turn, and you haven't finished activating your gang, but now it's my turn to have the next activation, and I will activate for a while until I fail an activation test, and now suddenly it's your turn. And unlike Blood Bowl, it's not a turnover. You don't lose the rest of the activations. It just provides some uncertainty about the sequence of the activations across the turn. And so if you get lucky and have all your activations, then I have all my activations, and it's like a I go, you go system. But that is intriguing because using the terminology that I was using earlier, like it doesn't allow you to know what the quantum of game state that's going to be passed is until the very moment when the table flips and you're like, oh wow, okay, oh right, I have to make a decision. And the obvious thing that you were going to do, because if you fail, they get to make one AP rather than two APs. And so they got to move a little bit. So they do hand a small amount of game state change over to you. So you can't like plan for exactly what they're going to do. And I think that's intriguing because it almost says, well, now your downtime is almost completely unusable. Like I can't do anything in that downtime because I don't know what the state is going to be until the exact moment that it ceases to be downtime for me, and then I have to make it a skip. And I don't know that that's bad. Like that is something that people who play that game really enjoy that game for. Like it's a moment of like tactical pressure where you're like, oh wow, I have to make a decision now. It's fast. Like it, it goes some way to sort of, putting that pressure of like it's a combat zone. I can't know everything, and that's cool. But it doesn't really answer the question like, what am I supposed to do in my downtime?
Yeah,
The game obviously will provide other answers because there's lots of fun mechanics of like crap that's going on. But
yeah, but the thing is, I think inherently, I think there's an interesting point there where throwing up like every time you mess with the nature of turn taking, you're breaking these sort of inherent rules, and people find it delightful when things don't do what they were meant to do, when things act in a way that is peculiar and shocking. And I have a small child, and that small child loves it when things go wrong or that he perceives as going wrong, because that's not what was meant to happen at that moment. That is inherently hilarious. And as grown-ups, like jokes work often by subverting our expectations. And anytime like a turn order system subverts your expectations of how long it's going to last for, when it's going to turn over, how it's going to turn over, there's something very delightful in that is a powerful tool to use. On the other hand, it can be very divisive. Like you mentioned Blood Bowl, which is a wonderful game and incredibly popular and obviously very brilliant. But the fact that one person can activate their entire team, and then it's your activation, and one incredibly awful, ridiculous, unlikely dice roll means that basically you only got to activate like one guy. There's such a sense of crushing injustice when that happens. And the nature of Blood Bowl players, they're like, yeah, hey.
Well, I mean, you're a Blood Bowl player because you're okay with that. If you're not okay with it, you're not a Blood Bowl player.
Absolutely. But like
right. I don't know if it's a 50-50 split, but it's very divisive.
Well, remembering that you're pressing on like deep nerves with some of these things when you play around with them, when you fiddle around with them, remembering that these are like things that are baked into us, at a young age and throughout our lives, I think is really important. And I think it's important to like consider these things and consider like how you muck about with them and whether to muck about with them, and understand how.
I mean, look, the other element of this is like, for me, like to go on the negative side of this, like what does bad downtime look for me? Like for me, it's really clear what bad downtime looks like. One of the things that I like, I'm playing a lot of 10th edition 40k at the moment for a couple of reasons. One is there's a real decent dude that I know, and this is the one game that he knows how to play. The other is I'm just super intrigued, and I'm trying to get like back into it just to kind of feel what one of those big games from GW feels like right now. But like, bad downtime for me is watching another person struggle with a lumbering resolution system that I have to be part of, even though my part is utterly mechanical and disinteresting and offers no decision of any kind, other than the like, other than the like, what's the word I'm looking for? Perfunctory addition of like, you have one resource that you can spend across like 15 to 20 combat like resolutions. You got one resource that you probably aren't going to spend on a saving throw, but you could, so you have to be aware of it. And then I have to be part of all these sodding resolutions where I have to roll on my saves, or
it
and that is bad downtime. It's draining, it's disinteresting, and like, I don't need to be there, but I have to be there.
No, absolutely. And saving throws are such a weird thing in that people get so unhappy when you take their saving throws away from them, but they don't. You're not doing anything. It's not actual non-downtime. It's just like painting a white wall white. You're technically doing something, sure, but it's not a thing. You're not required.
It's almost like, so sorry, idea for a mechanic. It's almost like the only point of it is that rolling dice is fun, and so every time Glenn does something, Mike, should be allowed to roll some dice. I mean, that could be the mechanic, is every time you move, I get to like roll 10 dice. And if I get any ones or sixes or whatever, I'm allowed to do something with them. Like almost like a real-time dice rolling dice, like Space Cadets or something, where you're just rolling dice the whole time. Because you know what's fun? Rolling dice. It'd be really difficult to record a battle report on YouTube because it'd be constant dice rolling noise. But like, maybe that's it. Like, downtime is about rolling dice because rolling dice is fun. Fine. Every time I roll like, a full house 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm allowed to go, oh, you've stepped on a mine. Look, they're right there.
Yep. Give one person 10 dice. They can roll them as many times as they like, and save dice. If they get them to be all ones, they get to interrupt and do something.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So can we go to the one dark place that we haven't been yet? I think even maybe on this podcast. I think we've maybe talked about it once. So I was rereading a prototype game that I wrote a couple of years ago, or maybe 18 months ago, called Loot Box, which is a fully simultaneous war game that I have never play tested because I'm pretty certain it doesn't work. But the intention being like, okay, well, let's push this to the utter ridiculous extreme. We're all playing all of the time, and there's some way of resolving combat that's like, well, if I move and there happens to be like a shooting dice that someone else has placed on the table within like an inch of me, I'm like, oh, I have to resolve the shooting dice because this bullet is now next to me. And so I can imagine that there is a possibility of creating a simultaneous miniature game, but it's a challenge that I haven't seen successfully achieved, certainly not by me yet.
Yeah, and it is something that we've come to a few times. Is like, is there a way of creating a tabletop miniatures game with zero downtime? I suppose my ultimate question here is, even if there is, why not just make the downtime good rather than try and eliminate it? I think it is inherent to these games, and I think that it defines. I think if you design one of these sorts of games, it defines them because it is so much of what your player is going to be doing. And
I don't know. I think right now it is. I don't disagree with that statement as applied to all current miniature games. I'm not certain it's a definitional feature of the form.
I think that maybe considering how you parcel it out, how it comes in bursts and beats and moments through the game, is for the moment a worthwhile thing, unless you're going to do something really transgressive and transformational and peculiar.
But like, one odd thing is that like, even in multiplayer video games where you'd sort of naturally imagine that downtime doesn't exist, like in most cases it does. Like, think of the sort of like fragged animation and the painful wait to respawn, like even in something like Quake, where that's a very short loop. Like there is a moment of downtime, and what's cool about that downtime is you're surprised by your own death, you're angry at the person, you're like planning your revenge, you're like thinking about the mistakes that you made, like so much excitement and like regret and forethought is going into like just that few moments between getting fragged and wanting to respawn.
But I think that is one of the reasons that the existence of that downtime is a choice for those designers.
Right, yeah, you could get fragged and instantly respawned with no
Yeah,
delay.
there
Like
is
there's no possible way that the computer can't do that.
yeah, they did not need to put that downtime in on any level. They chose to do it because of the way it makes their players feel in those moments. It makes dying mean something, because the only way they can make it mean something, the only way they can make it actually really affect you, is to take your fun away from you for like a few seconds and let you think about what you did, and then give it and then put you back in there and get you running back in. They choose that downtime, those sorts of games, and they choose it for very important reasons as game designers. Now, we are probably, like I say, unless you're doing something like pretty out there, stuck with that downtime. Why did those other designers choose to put it in? And what can you do with it, given that you've got to give it to somebody that does the same sorts of things, creates the same sorts of things? Because, we talk about Blood Bowl. One of the things about Blood Bowl is you fail and then you get punished by being given downtime, and that is a significant thing. And like I say, it turns some people very much off the game, but it's a fascinating game design choice. The way the downtime arrives in that game is like, not only if you failed a thing you were trying to do, which is unpleasant, and your plan is falling to pieces, and that's a punishment, but now I'm going to give you the most real world punishment I can give you as a game designer. I take your fun away, and I'll make you sit back and watch while the other guy pummels you for a minute. And that's real, actual pain that you're really giving a player. I think, considering those things, the emotional reactions to them, the ways you can break them, the reasons that other designers choose to put them in,
And it's interesting, like that choice to punish a problem, like punish a mistake with the removal of the fun, like that is not what waiting for your turn feels like most of the time, because all that we're doing here is that we're just being very British about like, well, let me allow you to move your army first, and then I will move mine. No, you take your time, and it's not at all the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But then maybe that's why people enjoy unpredictable activation systems.
Yeah, absolutely. In most games, in most turn-taking games, in the classic I go, you go systems, it's the cost of doing business. We play these sorts of games, they're turn-taking games, and so downtime is the inevitable outcome of the system within which we live. And then newer games and newer designers are playing with that concept and pulling the downtime into different places, positioning it as results of different things, putting it in like subverted locations, giving you things to do during it. And it's one of the main ways, I think, we talk a lot of times about the tech of these sorts of games. You look at older war games, they're just these big chunks of downtime because this is what we do. We take turns.
Yeah, because I've put all of the interesting stuff into the uptime. That's clearly where the game is. The downtime is just a cost of, as you say, a cost of doing business.
Yes, you go have a nice pint. I'll let you know when it's your go. And more modern game designers have started going, well, no, downtime is a thing. It's a thing. It makes people feel a certain way. It's a part of my game. Should I parcel it out and increase the turnover thinking time part of it? Should I make it a reward or a punishment for playing well or playing badly? Do I use it as a catch-up mechanic, on somebody, that the better they're doing, maybe the more downtime they're forced to endure? All these sorts of things I think are worth considering. And I'm just trying to say that it's a huge tool and it's a huge defining part of your game. It's not just a thing that happens and a thing that you have to just try and kill every time you see it. Don't just whack-a-mole it without thought. Consider where you've placed it. You chose where the downtime went in your game. You are the designer. You chose to put downtime in one place or another. You chose to give it to one player or another. Why? Why did you give it to them? Why did you put it there? It wasn't just a coincidence. These aren't just the way that the cookie crumbles and where the dice fall. These are all intentional choices. They better be intentional choices that you made. Think about them, consider the way that they affect your players, and maybe reposition that downtime. Think of it as a real part of the game. It's as an important mechanic as the dice or the cards or the movement or the miniatures. Don't just dismiss it, and don't just treat it as a null space within your design. That's the long and the short of my.
Yeah, this was a really good chat actually. We don't
God
we
forbid.
don't always discuss the meat of the topics that we're going to discuss in advance. This one has completely blindsided me and caught me out. Like, you've just pulled this one out of nowhere, but it's fascinating. I really like it.
Yeah,
More thoughts, and we might come up with a follow-up conversation on this, I think.
yeah. So this is something that I've really been thinking about. I think is really important and is really useful to consider. If you're designing a game, if you're playing a game, I assume you play games. If you're watching this channel, you've experienced downtime in a game. When did you experience it where it felt like the designer cared about it? Placed it somewhere with intent, rather than just you take a turn and then you're not taking a turn. This is what happens. How did it make you feel? How was it used? What's the best downtime you ever experienced in a game? Tell me these things and more. I really want to know.
I tell you what, there are at least 3 times in like high level Malifaux play, like at tournaments, where I was at sort of relatively near the top of the pack for some unknown reason. And like in that game, sometimes you make a couple of moves and it's like turn 4 or turn 3, and then you lift your hands up from the table and you go, there, I have set you the best puzzle I can think of, solve my maze. And then you hand that over to them, and that for me, that's the best downtime I've ever experienced, is like that, like, okay, solve my maze. That's all I've got.
Well, that's Mike's. Tell me about yours. Hit on the like and subscribe buttons while you're down there. Swing by the Discord. This is a conversation I want to have with people. It's a thing been thinking about, and I think it's a thing worth thinking about. So swing by there, hit me up, talk to me about it. I'll talk to you about it. But for now, from this episode of Rule of Carnage, I think it's a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.